You guys want here? I have it right here.
So the first question was, what are the current beliefs filmmakers, the people, or media currently hold about representation? Did you?
And ultimately, they're kind of three different entities when it comes down to it. I know I would say, the filmmaker world and the art world tends to be interested in it ultimately, and there's definitely a movement toward it, and certainly a support across the industry that is bringing more women and people of color into roles on set, as well as directing and all that sort of thing. And ultimately, they aren't the people with money, and so when all is said and done in the media world, the paramount interest, unfortunately, is still driven by what makes money, and so thereby, those people gambling with millions, if not, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, are not taking chances with that until things, and admittedly things have started shifting a bit. Something like Get Out definitely made it so that, wow, you can make money having a film with a largely black cast and filmmaker and all that sort of thing. But until those kind of watershed moments happen and start happening more often, the media is slow to respond and take chances. And ultimately, I would love to think that the public is interested, but for the most part, the public, are kind of sheep when it comes to, what is promoted to them and what looks interesting. And it's got superheroes in it right now. They probably don't care who's playing the superheroes. There certainly are people who do care, but we vote with our dollar, and ultimately, the full kind of shift isn't going to happen until people stop paying for things that don't have wider representation included.
Definitely, yeah. What are the issues? I mean, you kind of already touched that, but this question: what are the issues involving media representation?
I mean, the issues are who has power and who has the ability to tell their own story, and marvelously the world is the world of media is democratized, because honestly we have it in our pocket now. You could make a film on your iPhone. It's about how do you get it seen, how do you share your story, and right now there's still more than enough challenge to getting the story out in front of people, and although a lot of that is just building your audience, and at a certain point the world of YouTube has made it so that there are the YouTube stars, as much as we love them or hate them depending on what they're doing, have sidestepped traditional distribution channels and found an audience. It's entirely about finding an audience and monetizing what you're doing, and the world of distribution is having less power, although obviously there's still things like Netflix and Amazon that if you can get bought by them, the opportunity to connect with audiences is perhaps better, although there's so much that's on there that how do you get found, even like just being bought by something like an online streaming platform doesn't guarantee that anyone's going to see the movie, because it's just part of a myriad of different different films in a sea of things that no one's ever heard of. So curation is huge. People who watch things and share it, and who are the ones who are shaping the cultural conversation, and which is part of where film festivals come in handy, but also critics and ultimately just who are the voices that people are listening to, and why, how do we diversify those voices across the communities?
Definitely. What types of messages what types of messages does the media different?
What does messages?
Sorry, that question was kind of tight for you.
About different.
Can you just?
How does influence of the media affect how the camera shapes perception of a reality?
I mean, the camera is and camera and ultimately the film art in general is an empathy device, and what we see and what we connect with emotionally, deepens our connection to perhaps the people that we're seeing, our both our positive thoughts as well as potentially negative thoughts of those communities, and it's important, and in my opinion, that the people of the communities being represented are telling their own stories. For such a long time, and I look at indigenous stories, and cowboys and Indians really painted the native community in a way that was a colonialist white perspective, and having the opportunity to see films by indigenous filmmakers is something which has not happened for decades. Millennia ultimately. But yeah, that opportunity to see people telling their own stories, I think is a huge part of that.
How does one's frame of reference affect how people view different forms of media?
Our frames of reference inform everything that we do ultimately, and what we've learned, who we engage with, what we've seen, informs how we approach things, the choices that we make. And if 10 years ago got largely because no one was was taking the time to do the research, started engaging with sub-Saharan African cinema, and the films that we bring to Seattle that way. And until I started watching films from Africa, I didn't know what I was missing. and ultimately, we don't. It's true of audiences here as well. And if you haven't seen a film that stars, a certain group demographic, if you haven't seen Crazy Rich Asians or anything that has a focus on a very engaging, culturally rich story about a group of people, then you really have no idea that you're missing anything. And it's been so white dominated for a long time that there wasn't a demand for it because it wasn't perceived by the public. So our frame of reference, as soon as you step outside your box gets bigger, and so much of educating people through film, or whatever, just education in general, continues expanding our understanding of the world around us, whether it be travel or film or blah blah blah, you name it.
Sorry, we're just typing some notes here.
Fine.
No, not really. What benefits does wider representation in media bring to communities?
I know. Ultimately, I would imagine it's a better kind of comprehension of the world we live in, and a deeper, and again, getting back to empathy, just a deeper empathy for the people who live next to us across the street, across town, across the country, across the globe. You start. The world becomes a smaller place when you understand the people around you, and ultimately less fear. Because so much of what's currently built in our society is a fear of the unknown, and when you tell stories, when you learn about other people, you have the opportunity to change. Ultimately, you're shifting your frame of reference, and there's less darkness in terms of the dark corners with which to fear this person or that person or whole demographics of people ultimately.
Okay, this question pertains to Latinx communities. So what does representation in media looks like for Latinx in most Western media, and how does it compare to the average person casted for the role?
There's definitely, and there's certainly stars out there who come from the Latinx community, and I think we're still seeing I'm not sure. And I can't think of off the top of my head a really kind of earth-shattering Latinx film. that has like I mentioned Crazy Rich Asians and Get Out already in a way that Asian and Black communities have definitely seen a watershed moment of, oh wow, we can make money by catering to these audiences, and quite honestly just making good films, but whatever. But I can't think of a specific. I mean, there certainly have been successful films from Latinx filmmakers, but the crossover hit hasn't seemed to have, at least in my mind, been really obvious yet. But there are definitely more people of that community being represented, and I think within the festival world, festival and independent film world, there's some strong artists creating those stories.
Awesome.
Do you have any examples of how power is used on social issues that either support or like oppose those issues, like in terms of like media or like news or like films?
I mean, there's definitely, across the whole history of art and the idea of propaganda, and the stories that perhaps I want to say what's the thing, gloss over certain negative aspects in I look at like the Transformers films have a real raw military sort of thing to it that paints the military in a particularly great light, and there are definitely still representations of indigenous people in ways that are ultimately blackface. What was I still never saw this movie. What was it? The Lone Ranger movie with Johnny Depp as an indigenous character was a particular blight within my mind. But yeah, they're more than enough. I know there was a big hubbub recently about what was it called, The Upside.
Oh yeah.
The Bryan Cranston movie
with Kevin Hart.
Yeah, with Kevin Hart, about people people who are not in wheelchairs, portraying people in wheelchairs, and how much opportunity there is for actors who are in wheelchairs, and that whole and again, Bryan Cranston's a face that makes money, but if people who are disabled don't have the opportunity to perform and become a face that would make money, then there's no way for those performers to get out of the stigma, et cetera, et cetera. That help at all?
Yeah.
Thank you. Do directors, producers, or film studios display power in choosing characters for roles in movies or on TV?
Yeah, I know there's power everywhere, and as far as those choices go, and the representation that it is, and there's still a considerable amount of what's referred to as whitewashing in terms of particularly taking something and adapting it, whether it's Ghost in the Shell with Scarlett Johansson, which was one of many examples of a white actor taking on a role that was traditionally created as an Asian character, and it doesn't the ultimate westernization of the properties are frustrating, because there are people out there who other performers who again would probably do as good of, if not a better job, but don't have the selling power that a major actor has ultimately at this point. But yeah, I know the people. I know that there's a great. And it's worthwhile to look up. You probably know of Hannah Gadsby from the Netflix special that she did, but she did a speech the other day at the Hollywood Reporter, like 100 most powerful women thing. If you look up the Hannah Gadsby and the good men, you'll find the video. It's like 8 minutes long, but but digs into the fact that we as storytellers have a responsibility to reflect a more diverse group of people and the stories of people from their perspective than from the kind of the white colonialist mind ultimately.
When you create a movie, do you think of in what countries are you going to show the movie, and do you think about that viewers can have different frames of reference and have different opinion from the same movie? Do you pay attention to this detail?
And I myself don't make movies, but I'm more on the presentation side of film. But to speak from a filmmaker's perspective, I think most, it depends kind of where the filmmaker is and why they're making their film. I know that there some filmmakers may be making their film for a specific audience, and that it's not intended to be a mass market sort of piece. And I know, looking at sorry, I keep dropping my phone. Someone like Tyler Perry, who makes a bucket load of money making movies, I would argue that those films are largely for a very specific audience, and they make a lot of money because they cater strongly to the sensibilities and the frame of reference of a certain group of people, and that they aren't something that's being seen widely across the country, perhaps. And yet there are also, I know a filmmaker in Senegal that I talked with at one point who made an exquisite film in Senegal, but they don't have movie theaters in Senegal. And his reason for making the film had nothing to do with showing it in Senegal, because people probably won't get a chance to see it. But that film was specifically to share Senegal with the world. And his desire was to make a film that was artistic and engaging and was easily presentable to a wide international audience. So it depends ultimately where you can, and what audience you want to get, and ultimately how you can monetize that in essence. And for Alain, the filmmaker in Senegal, and if he made a film just for the Senegalese people, it would not make as much money potentially as a global film would. Whereas there are films that are made in Nigeria that are made for pennies, and they sell them on the street and make their money back in 2 days and turn around and make another one. And those movies are very much for selling on the street and engaging that sensibility of the audiences there. Much more exploitation oriented in terms of exploiting the audience. But those films don't have any play and really aren't particularly watchable outside of a Nigerian context.
Yeah.
With the movement of Asian Americans being casted more in different roles, what beliefs is there? I'm sorry.
What beliefs are there?
Sorry, the grammar is kind of off on this question. This was your question.
There was also one that stopped halfway through. That might be this question.
Sorry about that.
With the movement of Asian Americans being casted more, or in different roles, what beliefs are there?
Yeah, I think this is it. What beliefs do? And then it goes to a second question.
Oh, well, yeah, this is the wrong question. My bad.
But yeah, this is your question, so I think you can elaborate on it more.
Let's just do this one real quick.
Okay, we are sorry for this. Is there a way to apply power to demonstrate or solve different social issues?
Say that one more time. I missed part of it.
Is there a way in the movies to apply power to demonstrate or solve different social issues?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and the movies, the movies are a mass market opportunity to engage people with topics, and is something that sometimes is very specific. I think of a movie like Blackfish, the documentary film that about orca whales in captivity that has literally changed policy and basically put SeaWorld out of business at this point, although I think they're still moderately in business, but have changed a good deal within that culture of marine animals in captivity. To just representation of different lifestyles, different people, different identities. And there was a time, before the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that the idea of an interracial relationship was not something that would be shown on a movie screen. And until Ellen came out on TV, no character had ever come out before. And and media has been a place which is usually behind the times. I mean, obviously more than enough people had come out before Ellen came out. It wasn't a watershed aha moment, but it was a watershed moment for representation within film and something that is almost an arrival point, because it takes it out of just kind of personal within communities and puts it literally in everyone's living room potentially, and who's watching it, and people start talking about it around the water cooler or wherever people talk about things nowadays. And yeah, so there are definitely opportunities to create cultural dialogue. I think of something like Get Out is also something that just awareness of from any number of different perspectives, whether it's an African American perspective of how they might view that film versus how a white person looks at it and sees has the opportunity to look to experience, albeit artistically and certainly not in any way that is anything like what African Americans experience in our country, but to start to empathize and to have a deeper engagement with the reality of microaggressions and worse ultimately.
Okay, I know you kind of like touched up on like how filmmakers and like studios want to like make money, and so like they don't know about like taking risks on or anything. But is there like any other like differing opinions as to why people or filmmakers don't want to include like diversity or like different forms of representation in their like movies or TV shows or anything like that?
Well, and the money thing's probably the biggest when all is said and done. Ultimately, I think it tends, film and art in general is ultimately what you know as an artist, and it's sharing yourself, sharing your perspective. And if the only people making films are white people and ultimately white males, the films that they're making are going to be from that white male perspective, largely probably featuring white males. And until the people creating the films are people across the diversity spectrum, then there aren't going to be engaging, valid stories being told about the different populations of people who inhabit our Earth. So it also comes down to just what we as human beings understand and want to feel that we can authentically present on screen. And so there isn't, until people of a certain community are making their own films, the chances of them being represented across screens is more limited ultimately.
Okay, thank you. In your opinion, how does mass media affect our perception of society or real life?
I mean, and I think there's a lot, whether we like it or not, what we hear, what we see, what we experience ultimately through mass media affects our perspective on the world. And I certainly, looking back at, and part of my engagement here with SIFF Film Festival was initially, my realization that what I saw at the film festival taught me about the world we live in. And hopefully taught me well about the world we live in and didn't misrepresent it. The challenge with media is that you can say anything you want. We're finding that out considerably right now in the Fox News world and the current administration of whatever you want to say, you can say. It's hard, or in our day and age, in a lack of strong media literacy, for the public to decide what is true and what isn't true. And for so long, the news was considered, valid and true. I look back at like Walter Cronkite, and there were ethics in journalism that you weren't making stuff up or misrepresenting things, and that those ethics have gone away ultimately, and to the point where what we see is it's up to us to decide what to believe and what not to believe, and unfortunately, it's really easy with compelling media to believe whatever you just saw, and we have to as consumers challenge those perspectives, and even even a really great film, and I value Crazy Rich Asians, and I can't say I don't have too much, I don't have any valid pushback on it, but I can't take everything that Crazy Rich Asians presents and make an assumption about all Asian people, and certainly that's one story about Singapore, and that's not all of Singapore when all is said and done. But if that's the only story you've ever seen, if all you ever saw about indigenous people were John Wayne movies, your perspective is colored by that, and we have to to be a well-rounded global citizen, we have to seek out the variety of perspectives on the world. I know there's coming back to Africa, which I obviously engage with a good deal. There are filmmakers about 10 years ago who were very actively working to create films about African metropolises. And so much of our perspective on Africa, particularly from the 80s and 90s, awful commercials that were, raising money, was, total poverty and, people living in huts. And about 10 years ago, there's a really strong, and the movement's still continuing, to tell African stories and show African cities and change people's perceptions that Africa is just a place of abject poverty, because that's all that was marketed about it, until the people of the country started making their own films ultimately.
What beliefs are there that do not get as much spotlight as race, but are still important issues, in different forms of media?
I mean, race is definitely there. Any ism can be engaged in essence. I mean, definitely gender makes a difference in terms of but classism has, whose stories are being told? Are they largely middle class and upper class, and we're not seeing stories about the lower class and understanding those people? There's ableism in that, are there stories being told about people with disabilities, and having a deeper engagement with them? But yeah, I mean, any ism one comes across, and the sexism, ultimately, I'm trying to think of where, I guess heteronormalism or something like that, whatever that would end up being. But gay stories, trans stories, any variety of people who are perhaps different from the white cisgender male perspective that so much of our world is told from.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the last question is, what types of messages does the media
Oh my god.
what types of messages does the media have for different communities?
I mean, when they're represented well, they tell people that they're interested in them, and when they aren't represented, it reinforces the fact that society has no interest in them as humans in our world. And I look at the currently pronouns are a big thing within gender identity, and by not respecting someone's pronouns, you ultimately tell them you're not interested in them or you don't care about them. So by not respecting the community, either by telling a story in a false way that misrepresents the community, or just blindly ignoring them, as far as representation goes, you ultimately tell them we're not interested in you.
Thank you.
Always got
Yeah.
that picture.
Can we have 1 minute more with you to take a picture as a proof that we talked to you?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. We're getting our photo guy here.
Okay.
Thank you for the interview. It was really interesting.
Good. Different directions to go.
Yeah, you guys want to just go over there and we can take the picture over there.
Yeah, we can stay there and somebody will just hold the laptop and somebody takes